In this lesson, we'll work on rendering out our final animated sequence from Maya. Okay, so in our previous lesson, we had gone through the process of setting up some of these initial render settings, our file name, the output format, the name number extension, which is very, very important, as well as the start and end frames. Now, there's still a few additional things that we need to set up before we're actually ready to set this off for final render. So if we scroll down a little bit, one of the most critical things that you need to check is the renderable cameras. Now right now this is set to render from the perspective camera, but if you recall from the animation section, Delano had actually set up a specific shot cam. So what's going to happen is once we go through and render this, it's not going to render through the shot cam, it's going to render through the perspective cam. And trust me, there is nothing more infuriating than letting a render go overnight only to realize that you forgot to set it to the right camera. So absolutely double check that. We're going to pull this down, set that to shot cam, so that way we can make sure that it's rendering from the proper camera. And then we have the presets for the actual image size. By default it's set to HD 540, which is a 960 by 540 format. In our case, we're going to render this out as 1280 by 720. So that'll be the HD 720 preset. There we go. Okay, very good. So usually before I set off my final render, I like to just kind of make one last pass down through this comment tab and just double and triple check to make sure that I haven't forgotten anything. So just kind of looking up here, making sure I understand where the path is going to be output, and that is the path that I want. Make sure my start and end frames look good, so proper name, proper start and end frames, and proper extension. That's great. Coming through here, double and triple check to make sure that you are rendering from the proper camera, and make sure that you do have your resolution set correctly. Now once we have that, we're pretty much ready to go through our final render. Now whenever it comes time to rendering out a sequence like this, we're going to do it a little bit differently than what we have been in the, up to this point. So up to this point we've been using the render window, which is really just used for kind of single frame previews inside of Maya. Whenever it comes time to actually outputting a rendered sequence, we're going to rely on a process called batch rendering. So let's close this render settings window out. To get to batch rendering, we're going to pull down this menu and go to the rendering menu set. We're going to go to render and down to batch render. Now one thing I would probably do is go into the batch render window, check this, and double check to make sure that your auto render threads. This is going to control how many cores or how many threads on your system Maya is going to use for batch rendering. Right now it's set to auto render threads, which I actually find does not always use all of your available processing power. So as far as the number to put in here, a good way that I find to check this is to go into something like your Windows Task Manager, click on the Performance tab, and then count up the number of cores or number of processors that you see in this area. In my case, I have 8, so that means I'm going to set this to render on 8 threads. So that way I can make sure that it actually is going to use all of my processing power. So now, once that's done, we pretty much just hit batch render and wait for the final render. So you can see now this is going to start rendering with Mental Ray. If we want, we can open up the script editor and take a look at this. So we can see rendering with Mental Ray. This will take just a little bit to kind of get started. There we go, and now we can see process percentage of rendering done, 0, and it's starting at frame 1. And what we should start to see is incremental updates to the progress of this frame. So let's give this just a second to catch up. There we go. You can now see the render starting to kick off. 25% progress through frame 1, 35, and so on and so forth. So it's going to continue to update until frame 1 is done, and then it's going to move on to frame 2. And it's going to continue through that process again and again until we reach the end, which is frame 300. If at any point in time you ever want to cancel a batch render, or if we start to notice maybe something wasn't set correctly, you can go back to render And right underneath batch render, you have the option to cancel a batch render. So you can just cancel that. It'll ask you if you want to cancel the current job. If you do, just click yes. And now my batch render has stopped, which means now I can go back to Maya, make whatever changes I need to, and then if I need to start the batch render off at frame 2, I can easily do that. So if I take a look inside my Introduction to Maya project directory, if I take a look inside that images folder, there's the first frame, frame 001. Now it had started to render out frame 2, but remember I had canceled the render before it was able to actually finish that frame. So if I wanted to pick up at frame 2, I could definitely do that. I don't have to start over at the beginning again. Again, that's the beauty of rendering out individual frames. So if I wanted to pick up at frame 2, I just set the start frame to 2, and then just set off my batch render once again. Okay, so once this is finished with the render, you can see now that we're left with frame 1 all the way through to frame 300. Okay, very nice. So what do we do with these individual images once we have these rendered out? Well, you could take these and run these through something like After Effects. So After Effects does have the capability to read in an image sequence, and then it can render that out in any format you want, an AVI, a QuickTime, whatever the case may be. Or if you don't have access to After Effects and maybe you're still looking for a free solution to be able to take this image sequence and render this out as some sort of a movie file, you should be able to use something like Virtual Dub to accomplish the same thing. So Virtual Dub can bring in an image sequence and then render that out as any number of video formats. So if I wanted to actually see what this looks like, we could take this image sequence and let's just maybe open this up with something like FCheck, which is an image viewer from Maya, or that comes packaged with Maya. So if we wanted to, we could take a look at this. We could just go to File, Open Animation, and now just bring in basically our sequence here. So we can give this just a minute to kind of load up for us. There we go. So once this is done, we can actually see now the result of our handiwork. So there is our final animated and rendered scene. Very nice. So this will now pretty much bring us to the conclusion of this Introduction to Maya 2015 course. So at this point, depending on which areas of Maya you want to learn a little bit more about, we have a number of different courses that you could go through. So pretty much all of the major subjects or all the major areas of this course also have their own introductory courses where we go a little bit more in depth into some of the different features and settings. So for example, if you wanted to learn more about modeling, a great place to start would be Introduction to Modeling in Maya, where we spend a great deal more time actually exploring the modeling tools, modeling workflow, and a lot of things to be aware of. If you want to learn more about texturing and the process that goes along with that, you can take a look at our Introduction to Shading Networks course in Maya. If you want to learn a little bit more about the topics of rigging and animation, we have two different courses that you could go through. We have Introduction to Animation in Maya, as well as Introduction to Rigging. If you want to learn more about the dynamic and particle workflows in Maya, we have Introduction to nDynamics in Maya. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the lighting and rendering process, we have Introduction to Rendering in Maya, as well as Introduction to Lighting. And these are really just a very, very small fragment of the total number of Maya courses that you'll find in the Digital Tutors library. So feel free to explore, take your time, and enjoy yourself. So thanks for spending your time with us. We had a lot of fun making this. I hope you were able to have a lot of fun putting this together as well. Thanks for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.